And let me tell you, I am so excited about this series because we're going to be addressing many things that relate to women in general. But let me tell the men something here. I think few of us men really understand women. Is that true? And so I think there's going to be a lot that you can take away from this series as well. All the ladies are shaking their head yes. So let me welcome you if you're visiting with us this morning. This is Awake, and I'm Pastor Mike. And we're excited and privileged that you're able to worship with us. There are many things that go on outside of here. One of the things we're getting ready to jump back into are community groups. They'll actually start up not this Wednesday, but the following Wednesday. They meet in homes throughout the area. And there's actually 4 groups going to be running this next semester. And I would encourage you to jump in one of those groups if you haven't already. It is a great way to get to know people, a great place to see God move and work within your life. Let me ask you a question as we get started here. What if God could change your life too? I want you to think about that. What if God could change your life too? It's hard being a woman, isn't it? Some of you ladies are like, you do not even understand. Let me just say, I've watched my wife bear our 4 children. And I can tell you that if I was a woman, I would tell her, leave your hands off of me, and we would not propagate. All right? So I don't know much about being a woman, but I'm going to try my best. And some of you ladies are going to have to help me. All right? And then through this series, we're actually going to have one of the weeks, my wife is going to share with you things that she wished that women knew, okay, and held on to. Some of the other weeks, we've got some videos that we're going to show you in addition to some teaching that we'll do. And so we're going to kind of intersperse this a little bit. And my prayer, it comes back to that question, what if God could change you? And my prayer is that God takes and changes our lives as people, and then honestly, specifically changes the lives of the women here in this room. And other ladies that you know that should be here, and you're going to invite them and say, hey, you've got to come through this series because I can see God changing your life through this too. This week I posted a message on Awaken's Facebook page. And many of you responded. I asked, what are the best chick flicks out there? Because the best chick flick for me is one I fall asleep through. Don't have to face the misery of it. All right. And I heard a lot of different chick flicks. You guys help me out. What were some of them posted? Rocky is a chick flick. That's my kind of chick flick. Notebook. Yeah, The Notebook. Honestly, The Notebook was like the biggest one. And I had to ask my wife last night, what is The Notebook? So I know ladies are like, I'm going to murder you, right? I saw some other ones. Well, what else was on there? What else did you guys mention? Dear John. Love Actually, okay. One of them I saw on there was actually Titanic. Can I just ask a question? Is Titanic really a chick flick? I mean, think about it for a minute. You have, oh, Jack, I love you. Oh, Jack, you're going to die. Oh, Jack, get off my door. Right? Is that really a chick flick? And then she takes and she throws the ring into the bottom of the ocean. And all the ladies are crying, right? I'm sitting there like, really? You know how much that thing's worth? Am I right, gentlemen? I'll ask my wife sometimes. And in fact, the other week, or earlier this week, I went and I was walking and praying through my neighborhood, kind of a way that I can just get out and interact with God. I get back into the house. The kids are all in bed at this time. My wife is sitting down watching a movie on the Hallmark Channel. So you can understand why I went for a walk. And the movie ends, and I asked her, I said, hey, was it any good? And she's crying. She's like, oh, it was great. Why are you crying if it was that great of a movie? On the Facebook page, I had some men post some chick flicks. Let me just help you out, man. You can post one chick flick if you put Gladiator or Braveheart after it, okay? Otherwise, you lose the man card altogether. All right? Can we admit, though, is it fair for me to say, ladies, that women tend to be a little bit more emotional than men? Some of you men want to shake your head and you're scared to death. Let me watch this video clip and see if this plays out for you. Check this out.
I can't believe I did this. I can't believe I did this! Mother would be so furious. That's okay. I mean, what she doesn't know won't kill her, right? Oh my gosh. This would kill her. This is so fun! I am a horrible daughter. I'm going back. I am never going back! I am a despicable human being.
You know, I can't help but notice you seem a little at war with yourself here.
I can't help but notice that you seem a little at war with yourself. We start a series this week, and the theme for today, the thing we're going to look at, are the lies that women believe. Okay? Lies that women believe. And as I was preparing for this message, dating back even several weeks, I couldn't help but notice, I personally believe there is one lie that kind of just overcomes all the other lies, and maybe all the other lies built into this lie. And that one lie, I wonder that maybe women believe more than any others, is a lie that I'm not good enough. Let me walk you through a list of things. Think with me here for a minute. When it comes to our appearance, I'm not good enough. And I tell my wife all the time, you are hot, right? It's like, dang, praise the Lord. Okay? Some of you guys are like, I've never heard a pastor say that before. You've never seen a happy pastor. You know, Phil Robertson, happy, happy, happy. Right? But ladies, in our appearance, do we not sometimes, it's not so much how I look, but it's how I feel. Is that true? And so a lot of times we say, you know, I'm not good enough because I don't feel beautiful. And we compare ourselves to the lady in the magazine. And let me help you understand something. They have a whole entourage, and what you see in that magazine is not real. That's airbrushed. Or we compare ourselves to who we were when we were 16. Let me just help you out. I just turned 36, and I don't feel like 16 anymore. Or we say, you know, we're not good enough when it comes to maybe kids. Those of you that are raising kids, you feel a good parent when your kid is good, and you feel like a bad parent when your kid is bad, right? I remember one time we were in a Target, and my 7-year-old Riley, she was about 4 or 5 at the time, and she just broke down in a huge temper tantrum. You know, kicking and screaming. I don't even remember what it was all about. And I just told my wife, it's like, you know, I'll take her out to the car. You keep doing what you got to do. So I picked her up. And of course, it had to be in the back of the store, right? So I walk all the way to the front of the store. And, you know, she's kicking and screaming, you're hurting me, you're hurting me, right? And, yeah, some of you moms have had that. Some of you dads have had that, right? And everybody's kind of looking at me, right? And honestly, does it make me a bad dad? No. My son cannot hit the broadside hard. He misses the toilet all the time. I don't sit at home and say, man, I am a horrible father. But ladies, we have a tendency that if my kid is good, I'm a good mom. If my kid is bad, I'm a bad mom. That's not true. It's not true. We say we're not good enough when it comes to relationships. Right? You know, some of the single ladies in the room, we're going to actually talk more about that as the weeks come. But some of the single ladies in the room, you know, you say, somebody will say, hey, you dating anybody yet? And you're like, no. You know, it's like grandma. You dating anybody yet? No. Just look at your grandma and say, when she says, well, me and grandpa were married at 16. Just look at grandma and say, I don't want to be like you and grandpa. Ooh, what a mess. Right? Singleness is a giftedness. It doesn't measure whether you're good enough or not. You know, some of the divorced ladies in the room, we could easily have the tendency to think, you know, I have nothing to give, nothing to offer. That is so far from the truth. Let me just tell you, that is a lie from the pit of hell. So far from the truth. Ladies, we have a tendency sometimes that our identity of not being good enough goes back to our home, doesn't it? You know, and let me help you with something here. If you have a child under the age of 12, every day will look like you had a bomb go off in your house. All right? It does not measure whether you're good enough or not. It measures, wow, you got some kids that just create mess. Now, how many of you ladies have done all the laundry in the house, and then you look at yourself, you're like, oh, shoot, this is going to be dirty by the end of the day. You're never going to be caught up. Right? Or we measure that we're not good enough even here in the church, when it should be the place that we can be the most vulnerable and say, I don't have it all together. And I don't have to tell you that. You already know that about me. I don't have it all together. But the church should be a place where we don't sit here and say, am I better than that? Or I should be better than that. Or we walk in and we say, man, I can't let anybody see the disaster going on in my life. And so we put on this facade and we say, everything's good. And inside you're just crumbling. Or maybe something happens in your life and you say, I can't go to church until I get this fixed. That is a lie from the pit of hell. Because we, of all people, those that call Jesus their Savior, you of all people should know that you're never going to have it all together on this side of eternity. Even our past we carry with us, right? And because of the mistakes we made in the past, we say, I'm not good enough. And is it true? Let's just throw it out there. Many of the mistakes from the past that we carry with us into the future, that haunt us, are sexual sins. And can we be honest enough with ourselves that sex is more than just a physical act? Because if it's not, if it's only a physical act, then that means a whole generation of people are walking into the future dealing with just physical baggage. It's not true. But because of the things that we've been through, because of relationships we have, because of kids, because of our homes not looking the right way, because of even just showing up here in church and feeling like I have to put it all out and say everything is fine, we have a tendency to believe that I'm not good enough. And we think that if I, in my identity, can get all those things in line, then I'll feel like it's good enough. Let me let you on a little secret. That's never going to happen. And it's like a hamster spinning the wheel. You're never going to get all that stuff lined up on this side of eternity. And you know what? God is okay with that. God is okay with that. In fact, I want to introduce you to a character here this morning, and we're going to pick different characters throughout this study women that God has used despite different circumstances. As we enter into that, you can turn to Hebrews chapter 11. That's where we're going to spend most of our time. Hebrews chapter 11. If you're new to the church and you're kind of like, man, I don't know where Hebrews is, I remember that, walking into a church and sitting there and be like, Hebrews, what the heck is Hebrews? I don't speak Hebrew. It's not in Hebrew, it's in English. And we'll actually put it up on the screen here for you so that you can follow along. Or, as Jeff mentioned earlier, we have it in our YouVersion app as well so that you can follow along electronically from your phone. As we turn to Hebrews, or you're looking up Hebrews, or they're throwing it up on the screen, I want to ask you a question real quick. What is faith? Okay, good. What is faith? And there's actually a question in our YouVersion app here that you can answer, even interact with us. What is faith? I'm trying to get on YouVersion itself. Here we go. I want to show you a verse. You see, the author of Hebrews was asking the same question. What is faith? And actually, chapter 11 is kind of like the Hall of Fame. Any sports fans in here? You know, football Hall of Fame, baseball Hall of Fame, hockey Hall of Fame. They actually play that on this side of the border. But this whole chapter mentions people that are in the Hall of Fame, what we could call Hall of Fame of faith. And so the author of Hebrews kind of is trying to figure out what is faith. He says this in chapter 11, verse 1. He says, "Now faith is confidence in what we hope for, and assurance about what we do not see." You see, we often think that faith is, man, if I just believe hard enough, it will happen, right? Or we think that faith has to do with the probability of something happening. And neither of those are true. You know, what the author here is trying to explain is that faith is believing the truth of what God tells us and then taking that truth and putting it into action. That's what the author here is telling us. In fact, Paul, who actually for a long time flew in the face of God and tried to live up all those lists of things I just gave you, those just aren't for women, those are for men too. We have our own lists of things that if I can get this together, then I'll be good enough. I'll have it all together, right, men? And Paul was that same guy. He said, if I can get that list together, then I'll have it all going on. And he realized some point in his life he was never going to get there. And he turned his life over to Christ. And he actually said that faith was hearing the Word of God and then letting the hearing of the Word of God be applied to his life. And therefore living out in action what he heard the truth of God telling him. Okay? And so the author here of Hebrews is saying, here's a list of men and women. There are two women in this list of men and women who believed the truth of what God told them, truth, and then in that truth played it out. Okay? There's people in that list like Noah. And so, you know, God tells Noah there's going to be a flood. There hadn't been a flood or there hadn't been rain in years. But Noah, because of his faith, he built an ark, right? His faith went to action. And so he built this ark. He's in this Hall of Fame of faith. And it's like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Or, you know, we see in this Hall of Fame of faith another guy, Abraham. Now, Abraham was kind of a doofus at times. But God was gracious with him. And he's in this Hall of Fame of faith because he trusted God. God said, move. And Abraham said, where to? And God said, just go. And Abraham said, oh, okay. And so he listened as God directed him, right? So he moved into action with the promises of truth that God was telling him. So Abraham's in there. Another guy in there, his name is Moses. You know, we know Moses, he led a whole nation out of slavery. I think one of the greatest leaders of all time, honestly. And so God took and he used this guy, and he's found here in the Hall of Fame of Faith. And there's many other characters in there. I would encourage you to read that this week, Hebrews chapter 11, and look at some of the people that God really used. There's two ladies in there. One of them was Sarah, and Sarah was Abraham's wife. Now, I would throw Sarah in that mix just because she was married to Abraham. And some of the things that that guy would do, and Sarah was just steady. You know, she just stayed the course. But it mentions she's in there because she believed the promise of God that God would give her a child when she was well beyond the ability to have children. You see, okay, so God gives the truth and she puts into action that truth, right? But there's another lady here in the Hall of Fame of Faith. And you might be a little surprised. Look down in verses 30 and 31 of Hebrews 11. It says, by faith the walls of Jericho fell. Now there's a story in Joshua 2. For the sake of time, we won't go there. And I would encourage you to read Joshua 2 this week because it goes in line with who we're talking about this week. But it says, you know, the walls of Jericho fell. So God was leading His people by Moses into a new land where they would call home. Okay? And so I'm sure many of you have wandered a long time, and just that ability, I know from experience, to say, this is my home, is life-freeing in a lot of ways, right? And so Moses led a whole nation, and then Joshua took that nation and moved them into this land that God had promised them. But they had to defeat the people of Jericho first in order to start taking the land that God was giving them. And so God told them to march around the city 7 times. But before they went in as a nation, He sent some people to spy out the land. And it says here that by faith the walls of Jericho fell after the army had marched around them for 7 days, like I told you. But by faith the prostitute Rahab, because she welcomed those spies that Joshua sent ahead of time, was not killed with those who were disobedient. So you see what's happening here, just to fill in some gaps, is Joshua he sends some spies into this land that God is telling them to take, okay? And Rahab, who it says here, Rahab the prostitute. Now, some versions of the Bible will say, well, she was an innkeeper. You know, she kind of had the area hotel. That word in Hebrew can kind of be twisted that way. But if you look at the original language in the Greek, no, she was a prostitute. She was a woman of the night. Okay? And so that clears up any fuzziness about who Rahab was. Rahab was a prostitute, a woman of the night. Okay? Well, she took and she hid these spies in her house. And you can read about that, Joshua 2. She hid the spies in her house. And when the city gathered wind of this, they sent some men over there and they said, hey, we want those spies. And she put her own life on the line and said, they're not here. And she says in there even, she makes those spies promise her that, she says, I know that the Lord, and she says the Lord, meaning that He is my Lord as well, which is an amazing thing because she lived in a totally pagan nation. But I'm guessing she had heard the miraculous things that God was doing with that nation while they were in the desert, that she said, whoa, if God is doing that for them, I bet God can do that for me too. And so she put her faith in God, the God of the Bible, okay? And she makes those spies promise her. She says, now when you come, I know God is sending you to take this whole city. Promise me that you will spare me my life. And then she says, promise me that you will also spare the life of my father and my mother and my siblings and just her immediate family. That's amazing to me. You know why? She followed Christ, the God of the Bible. But she was not just focused on herself and her own salvation. She was focused on the salvation of those that were close to her as well. That challenges me. Do I care about the people around me that desperately need to hear and see the same God that I have the privilege of hearing and seeing? I pray that challenges you too. Because that is why we are here. We are here to reach those that are far from God. And there's tons of people that will come worship with us that say, I don't even know if God is real. And we're like, that's cool, come here anyways. And we'll figure it out together. But we need to make sure, those of us that know the truth of the God of the Bible, that we are saying, God, use me to impact those around me. And that's what Rahab did. That's what Rahab did. Now, it's interesting. Hebrews uses her as a testimony of faith. A prostitute. And do you know that James uses her as a testimony to faith as well? James 2:25. He says, in the same way, was not even Rahab the prostitute considered righteous? For what she did when she gave lodging to the spies and sent them off in a different direction. Basically, James is saying, Rahab knew the truth of God, and she took and put that truth into action. She took the truth of what she knew from God and put it into action. Can I just be honest with you here real quick? Rahab challenges me in my faith. Can I tell you, a prostitute challenges me in my faith? You know why that is? Because I think all of us, in the eyes of God, are that prostitute. Because I can tell you, before I knew Christ, there are many other things that I tried to fill. Many other things. And that list that we mentioned earlier of me not being good enough, I wonder how often Rahab looked at that list and said, man, wow. And then she had to look at the promises of God and say, God changed my life. She didn't know she was going to be written in a Hall of Fame of faith. She was just walking in obedience. She said, that God changed my life. Now I need to put that into action. God, show me where to put that into action. These spies show up knocking on the door. She's like, is this it, God? And she did, I believe, what came natural for her at that time. Because God had changed her life. What if God could change your life? I think we first have to realize that we all are that prostitute. We prostitute ourselves to all kinds of different things. And I have watched people just struggle with this over the years. Even as I was sitting and writing what I believe God wanted to say to us here this morning, as I was sitting down and praying through that and writing it down, I was sitting at a Wendy's, of all places to write a sermon, right? I think it's part of my ADD. It's like I got to be around the action. But I'm sitting there and I'm just watching the eyes of people. And I see this lostness. I see this baggage. And I see this brokenness. This lack of hope. And I say, there's somebody trying to live the list. There's somebody trying to say, if I can just get all this together, then I'll be good enough. And my heart breaks. Because I too was there with that list. And I knew that list never came together. Never came together. I wonder how often Rahab struggled with her past. I'm guessing if she's like me and you as well, that there are many days she would wake up and would struggle with who she used to be. Just like I'm sure many of us here this morning struggle with who we used to be. And I thought about, the Hall of Fame of Faith. These men and ladies that God used to do incredible things. And each of them had a shady past in one way or another. But they took the truth of God and they put it into action. And you know the one thing that I believed allowed them to do that? There's a phrase. I want you to write this down. I want you to memorize this. I want you to live this. And that phrase is submit the emotional to the spiritual. Submit the emotional to the spiritual. And all of us, in one way or another, can be emotional, can't we? We can say, that is still holding me back. I can't get past that. And God is saying, no. Look at the truth of who I say you are now. He says, Rahab, I pursued you long before you looked for me. God knew that Rahab was going to be a prostitute. And He pursued her anyways. God knew the path that you would take, and He pursued you anyways. Pursued you anyways. Have any of you guys never flown before? Anybody here never flown? Okay, a couple of you. I would love to fly with you sometime because it would just be a blast. I remember the first time that I flew. I was flying with actually my pastor of a church that I was working at. And we were flying to Atlanta for a conference. And my first flight, it was the worst flight I've ever had since. And honestly, we're flying through the air, and we get up there, and it's like, wow, this is pretty cool, right? And then there starts to be this thunderstorm. We're in the middle of the sky. There's this thunderstorm. So I'm looking out the window, and there's lightning crashing here, lightning crashing here. And it's hilarious. They say, okay, we need you to put your trays in the upright fashion, right? Put away any mobile devices. And then they say, put your seatbelt on. And I'm thinking to myself, put my seatbelt on. If we fall 40,000 feet, the only thing my seatbelt's going to do is help you find my dead body, right? But anyway, so we put our seatbelts on, and I'm watching the stewardesses. They're getting to their seats real fast, putting their seatbelts on. And at first, it felt like we were riding a bull. And I was like, woo, yeah, this is cool. And then the one time, it felt like we fell like 10,000 feet. Just the bottom dropped out, right? And at that point, I look at my pastor I'm flying with, and I couldn't tell. He kind of had this half grin on his face. I couldn't tell if it was like, this is your first time flying, or he was like, oh, this is really bad, right? So we're flying through the sky, and we're sitting by the emergency door, right? And have you ever flown, you see the clouds under you, and you're thinking, man, if I could just eject that door. And like the movie show, just kind of suck you out, and you can just float on those clouds, right? And so we're flying through this storm, and I just wanted to get out of there. And so I'm thinking, if I could just open that door, it would just suck me right out, and it'd be all over with, right? I don't have to worry about crashing in a plane. And then I kind of realized that if you, wow, now I have nowhere to go, right? So I was like, no, that's a bad idea. But I wonder in our lives, how many of us, we're flying through life, right? And it feels like all around you, the plane is falling apart. It feels like life is falling apart. Have you guys ever been there? You're flying through life, and everything around you is falling apart. Can I tell you something? As that pilot was confident he would land that plane, and obviously did, we can be confident that God is going to land us as well. We can be confident that I am good enough because God has made me good enough through His Son. And in fact, Psalm 139, it says, "For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb." God says, I knew you. I praise you because I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. My frame was not hidden from you when I was made in the secret place. It says God knew me, and God knows you. There's no hiding anything from God. He knows you. It says, when I was woven together in the depths of the earth. But then he says, your eyes saw my unformed body. All the days ordained for me were written in your book. You knew the path I would take, God, before I even took it. Rahab says, God, you knew that I would be a prostitute before I was even a prostitute. How precious to me are your thoughts, God. How vast is the sum of them. Were I to count them, they would outnumber the grains of the sand. When I awake, I am still with you. There's one other place in the Bible where Rahab is found. That one other place where Rahab's found is, guess what? In Jesus' family tree. Did you know that God took a hooker and turned her into a child of God? God took somebody that tried to measure up to this list of, God, I'm just not good enough. And he said, no, you are good enough because I will make you good enough. Do you see? It does not matter. Ladies, wherever you have been, whatever you have walked through, God is going to land you. And we are good enough through Jesus Christ. Here in a minute, I'm going to have you watch this video. And Jeff and I were talking this week, how do we end this? And we both watched this video and we said, this video just encapsulates everything we're trying to get across here this morning. And that is that God can take you wherever you're at, and He can raise you up in a hall of fame of faith. He can change your life in incredible ways. Watch this video. I think you'll understand what I'm saying.
But it didn't take long before my passion for the gospel and my passion to see lost men and women saved started to rub against or collide with the church. And so it wasn't very long, and I can give you dozens and dozens of stories, but really one that kind of broke the camel's back, where I decided if I was going to do this, I wasn't going to do it as a churchman, because the church, more often than not, was an enemy of conversion and not its friend. I'll give you an example. This turn in me, this break in me happened that God has been just disciplining me on ever since. Occurred my freshman year of college when I randomly sat next to I'm a freshman in college, I'm sitting next to a 26-year-old single mother who's coming back to school to try to get a degree, never been to church, didn't know much about Jesus, and so we began this ongoing dialogue about the grace and mercy of Christ in the cross. And so me and some of my crew go over to her house and babysit her daughter. She's actually in an extramarital affair at the time with a married man. And so we talk through that, the wisdom in that. This is the relationship we had, just kind of serving her and trying to explain to her spiritual things. A friend of mine was playing at a church in the area, and so I asked her to come. He was a musician, and so I said, hey, a good friend of mine's in a band, he's playing. Why don't you come hear him? And so she agreed. She thought it would be a concert. I knew better. It was shady. It was excellent. And she came with me, and we listened to Robbie play, and he was tremendous, just a real anointed guy. And then the minister got up, and he said, today I want to talk to you about sex. And so I immediately go, uh-oh, this could be a problem. And he took a red rose, and he smelled it, and he showed how pretty it was, and then he threw it out into the crowd. He goes, everybody needs to smell this. There's about 1,000 of us there, almost all of us college and high school. Smell the rose. I want you to smell it. I want you to touch it. I want you to see the texture in it. Do it. And I'm going to teach. And then he began what honestly, up until this day, and this might have to do with my heart, I'm still wrestling, was one of the worst, most horrific handlings of what sex is and what it isn't that I ever sat through. It was fear-mongering at its best. It was, you don't want syphilis, do you? And everybody's smiling and having a good time until there's herpes on your lip, and right? And so I'm just thinking with Kim beside me, what are you doing? What are you doing? And then as it wraps up, he goes, where's my rose? Where is it? Where's my rose? And, some kid came up, the rose is just completely jacked up. It's broken, the things are off, the petals are broken. And he lifts it up, and his big crescendo, his point is to hold up that rose and go, now who would want this? Who would want this rose? And I remember feeling anger, like real, legitimate, I want to hurt him anger. And it was all I could do not to scream out, Jesus wants the rose! That's the point of the gospel. That Jesus wants the rose. That he made him who knew no sin to be sin on our behalf, that we might become the righteousness of God in him. That while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. Christ won. You're not even teaching the basics of our faith.